Louise Steenekamp. She's Head of IT, SA Commercial at Aspen Pharmacare. Louise Steenekamp is a dedicated business professional experienced in information and technology management, organizational change management, which I think we've all heard enough today to know that how critical she is, management consulting, service management, process optimization, digital transformation, IT operations, and non-profit organization management. Currently the head of IT, SA Commercial at Aspen Pharmacare, she's leading a multidisciplinary team responsible for IT operations, infrastructure, connectivity, information security, cybersecurity, service management, ERP, business intelligence, data analytics, cloud services, and digital enablement. She's very passionate about creating an environment where teams and individuals can continuously grow and thrive. And today, in her talk Back to the Future, she's talking to us about these business transformations in action. And she says, no matter how many times you embark on a new SAP implementation, there are certain things that you will never change, things that can make or break an implementation. No matter how well you plan and execute, these familiar unknowns are critical and require focus and attention to achieve synergy. This Back to the Future talk will focus on what it takes in terms of individuals, teams, and leadership to pull off all of this together. Welcome, Louise. It's good to speak to you again.
Hi, Innocent, and thanks for that long introduction. Thanks everyone who's still logged in. I know this is the graveyard shift, so I'll try and be swift. Yes, let's get straight into it. All right, so yes, for those of you who know me, I come from a consulting background, quite a bit in SAP. So this was quite a different kind of implementation in that it was the first time that I really did one in this kind of role on the client side of the fence, the customer side of the fence. So yeah, let's dive into it. Right, so first off, just my disclaimer to say that these are my views and they don't necessarily represent Aspen. So please, if you do want to share anything that you might find useful in the presentation, don't say Aspen said. You can rather say Louise said. Right, and then yes, some things never change. So some things are amazing. I mean, the last time I really actively worked on SAP was about 16 years ago. So that was clearly not S/4HANA. You didn't have Fiori. You didn't have embedded analytics. And oh my goodness, what a change. It's chalk and cheese. I am absolutely loving the technology. So before I get into the stuff that don't change, I thought I'd just spend some time on that. I mean, things like embedded analytics capabilities, where you now, instead of just having a static report, you've got dimensions. You can in real time slice and dice information and get those analytics out of your transactional system. You've got a Google type functionality where you can type in a customer reference number of sorts and get all the related transactions and documents. I mean, they've made SAP almost work like Facebook. And maybe it's just because I've been removed from the details of it for so long that it's now all wow, but it really is fantastic. There are other things that haven't changed. So on the good side, you can still use your transaction codes in Fiori, which is great. I actually remember some of them. And then there are other things that haven't changed, like there's still no undo button. You know, if you've got something that you need to undo, you need to undo a whole stream of transactions. You can't just hit undo and it's undone. So those are some of the things that haven't changed. But overall, from a project perspective, I think there's a lot more that is very familiar and that we continue to learn the lessons with, and that we continue to need to get right. So from a preparation perspective, obviously preparation is always important. I also never realized when I was still on the consulting side of the fence how much work actually goes in on the customer side, because on the customer side, you don't only have this huge transformation, which impacts your business and the way you work and the people doing the work, but you also have normal business as usual things. You know, there are commercial agreements that keep going on. There are all sorts of things happening that you need to be aware of and that you need to plan for as well in that project. So just some learnings which are, I guess, also familiar, but they're familiar, but they never get old. So don't underestimate the scope and the size and the impact of the project. Try not to make assumptions. We all try with the best of intentions to think how we think things should work, and we don't want to waste people's time with including them, if they're not necessarily going to be directly impacted and all those things. But I think one thing that I have learned again is don't make any assumptions. Do approach every project like it's a new one. In our case, this was a very new implementation. We went from quite a complex ERP environment that had been built up over 23 years, a whole lot of different technologies, but fully automated in some instances. Some parts of processing was manual, but the team had really done a phenomenal job in getting everything to work. So from a user perspective, if you think about the change, it's much bigger for us in IT than for some of the users. If you got a notification when something reached a certain point and you had to do something, your transaction has now changed, but that process really hasn't. You didn't know all the risk involved with the complex environment that they had before. So that's also always interesting, just to see that dynamic between what the IT team is experiencing and the business people involved in the project team versus the end users. You do need to plan for change. I mean, our biggest thing obviously was COVID. During our implementation, we were on lockdown for the biggest part of it. We had, fortunately, just before lockdown, we'd rolled out Microsoft Teams. We'd rolled out our O365 cloud environment. And we'd been training people on using Teams and OneDrive and all of these technologies. And when lockdown hit, the business went into overdrive in terms of taking everything online, even events, meetings, training, everything galore. So fortunately, our business users were quite accustomed to working in a virtual digital environment by the time we got to the points of training, UAT, all of those kinds of things. But you do need to prepare for any eventualities. One of the things, for instance, that we did was with training. When we got to the training decision in terms of, do we now do traditional classroom training? Do we do e-learning? What do we do? Personally, my preference is, well, in a perfect world, it's nice if you can have a hybrid of everything. But nothing beats a user getting access to a system where they can actually break stuff. And that's something that you do lose a little bit in e-learning, because you've got a very scripted, very structured lesson that they follow. But there are lots of benefits in that as well. So you've got the training material that you can keep. They can always go back and use it as a reference. If you've got new people, it's easy to train, all of those things. So what we decided was, we had just gone live on SuccessFactors LMS, also shortly before the project hit its crunch time. So we actually made the call and decided that we would prepare to do everything fully online, just in case this COVID thing didn't quite go over as fast as everyone had hoped. And we did end up having to do everything online because obviously it's a massive project. You can't just delay the project or to extend it. There's lots of implications from a business and financial perspective. We had to consider things like our financial year end, which was the end of June. There's only limited things that you can do in that period. So you have to stop long enough before the time. If you're going to extend your project, then there's a pause, which is also not ideal. So anyway, it is good to prepare for any of those eventualities. And we were lucky in that, because we did end up doing all of our training for our business unit anyway, online. We do have quite a very federated business model. So in our case, my business unit, the one that I work for, is SA Commercial. So that's the South African sales and marketing business in Aspen. So this project was ourselves as well as our head office, the holdings business. Some of their training did happen during the time when lockdown wasn't, the rules weren't that strict. So within obviously all the normal COVID safety regulations, they did do some classroom training as well. But UAT, everything, was kind of a hybrid. Fortunately, we had planned for it, so we had all the tools available. Your planning also extends to hardware. So this also, I had this view that everything is nice now, it's like it's in the cloud. You don't have the normal thing, because we'd also made the call to go Fiori. Why wouldn't you if you're doing a new implementation now? I thought, nice, if you just send people the URL and Bob's your uncle, they can log in. It's all web-based. No need, like in the old days, to spend months making sure you've got the right specs and you get the software and the GUI installed and all of those nice things. However, thank goodness we had some really clever technical minds on board. So they really helped us a lot during the preparation phases to also sort out hardware. So things that you need to consider in that environment is, are you going to allow people, so you've got people now working from home, or you might have people working from the office, or you might have some hybrid. So what does that mean in terms of connectivity? What do you need to tell people their connectivity has to be for performance not to suffer? Do you go the public route with Fiori? Do you go the route via VPN? If it's VPN, are you a multinational? Where is your VPN actually hosted? Because Fiori doesn't look at where your SAP server is. It actually looks at where the nearest Akamai server to your connectivity point is. So if you've got a multinational and your VPN is sitting somewhere in Europe, and your users connect via that VPN, it's going to look for its closest Akamai server, which means the latency in South Africa is going to kill you because it's going to go from there quickly to Europe. So you need to change your rules on your VPN so that it has a local breakout and finds the nearest server. Same thing if you are going to have some of the functions that are not forced through VPN that people can just connect to, for instance, things that you might want them to do on the mobile app, you need to consider your local service providers and test all of them so that you know whatever connectivity people have at home, it's also that the performance isn't adversely impacted. So there's all those kinds of things. Your hardware planning and preparation might look different now, but it's certainly still there. And of course, you need the right team. I mean, this sounds cliche, but you cannot do this without having the right team in place. So it really is like going into battle. You need to know that you can trust the people around you, that they've got your back, that they know their stuff, that they know what they need to do, and they can do it when it needs to be done. It was a very challenging time with COVID. Obviously, you are impacted with people unwell or their family members being unwell, so you've got those resource impacts as well. But you need people who've got positive energy. You can't buy that kind of stuff. That is a part of attitude that you definitely need to look for in that team. You need people who are committed. They need to want to make this work and want to make this successful. They need to be self-driven. You can't baby and micromanage the whole team all the time. They need to know exactly what's expected of them and need to figure out how to do that. They need to be hardworking. You get to a point in crunch time, and we'll get there just now, where you need hardworking people. They need to be assertive. In this case, I saw an interesting quote yesterday which related to teamwork, and it said that in this case, silence is not golden, and that's absolutely true. You need people to speak up. If there's something that they're busy testing in its business units that it's not working exactly as they should, it's not, it's fine, we'll get to it later. They need to speak up. You need people who are assertive enough to put things on the table when they need to be on the table, and they need to be relentless in their pursuit of getting things implemented the way that they should be. And they need to be accountable. They need to take accountability for their actions. We were very fortunate in that we had a very strong team who was appointed centrally to have more of a global view across all the business units. Because we're such a federated model, it's good to have that team so that we can make sure that we at least align with our other businesses in terms of the directions that we go in. Also, in our business unit, we didn't have a vast amount of internal SAP skills, so that helped a lot just to have that comfort and that people who've been there, done that, who know their story, who are committed. And who can provide that guidance. So we were very fortunate with that. My team, the IT team, oh my goodness, I could not have done this without them. Those guys are phenomenal. I would literally take them into any battle and back. They really, really, really pulled their weight. And then, of course, we had a phenomenal team in terms of our implementation partner as well. In our case, it was NTT, so locally that means Dimension Data, and more specifically the Brighthouse resources. In this case, it worked very well. It was a good cultural fit. The resources that we had on the project were also totally committed. They were researtive. They really helped us a lot to find that balance between what we think we want, what we think business wants, what business think they want, and what is actually the right way of doing things. That's always tricky. And then also, you can't exclude in this your external stakeholders, especially if you've got a highly integrated environment and you've got other partners in your value chain. You've got suppliers, you've got customers, you've got distributors, and especially if you come from a highly integrated environment and you're going into one, you absolutely need the right people from their side as well. And we were fortunate in that we had that in our partners in the value chain too. Of course, your leadership, and we'll get to leadership just now again, is equally important. They need to, even if they don't understand the details and the ins and outs and the intricacies of the project, you absolutely need their support, and you need that strong leadership in it as well. So when the going gets tough, and a lot of this sounds, and that's why I thought Back to the Future is appropriate, because you can't go forward unless you go back and fix your assumptions and get the basics realigned, because otherwise you're never going to get to that future that you're trying to create. So when the going gets tough, now during crunch time, and this is something that is really unavoidable, I think this for me was, I sat back at one stage and thought, wow, we've been doing this for decades. And every single project of this size, and I mean, we were lucky. I think we thought locally that these size projects were kind of over and done with a few years ago, but they're not. But you get to that crunch time where you can't throw extra resources. You are out of time. There are a gazillion things that still need to get done. It feels like you're always just almost on top of the mountain, but not quite there. And this quote I thought was also very appropriate. There's no elevator to success. You have to take the stairs. Doesn't matter how many times you do this. Crunch time is coming. Your people are going to work their butts off. You need to be there in terms of leadership, even if it's things that you can't do anything directly about. Just being there in your presence, and flip, if it means ordering coffee through Mr. D, then do that. And then motivation, just to keep these guys energized and motivated. Like I said, we had a phenomenally strong team, but sure, hats off to everyone and everyone who provided that motivation and that leadership. We also had really strong executive leadership and support in the whole process. So there was never a time where we felt lost or felt like we weren't going to make it. But that was one of the learnings for me, is doesn't matter how many times you do this, crunch time comes, and it's just going to be a period of not seeing the sun and just crunching to get there. And then the little big things. So this is also key. And again, it gets back to assumptions. So do pay attention to the business and to all the areas of the business and to stakeholders and people inside your business, even if you think that they're not directly impacted. So for instance, if you are doing a back-end implementation and you've got a sales force who are field force and they don't ever log on to the ERP even, but their income and incentives are going to be impacted, make darn sure that you do include them and that you do understand fully what it is that they need to get out of it. If there are people in the value chain that do certain processing, make sure that you understand what a day in the life of looks like for each of those people. If a user used to get a notification at a certain point in the process, and now they no longer get that notification, it's a crisis, because there's no trigger to tell them they need to go on to the next step. So you might have the best implementation, the best system in the world with all the bells and whistles, but if they don't know that the process is now at that point, they now need to do the next step, then it's a miss. Also, especially in the case of e-learning, like I say, it's got its place, it works very well, but you definitely do need to go back and handhold those users and those processes and make sure that every person understands what they need to do and what that impact is of what they do or don't do on the next step in the process. And this is where involving business people from the start is also key. We were also fortunate there in that we had a fair contingent of super strong business individuals who from the start knew that this was going to become their responsibility, also the success of the implementation to take forward. So that buy-in definitely helped. And then of course, adoption issues, we also, and you've been seeing this in reports again for decades, the reasons why projects succeed or fail is because of the people, and it's change management and it's user adoption. But what I've found is that, and I found this I think now more than ever, and probably because I'm sitting on the customer side of the fence, where before it was consulting, so it's guidance and advice and coaching, but it's different when you are actually implementing it in your own environment. What I have found is that resistance to change is not the biggest problem for adoption. It's actually, you need to be compassionate to the individuals in each and every step, in each and every process, because remember, that person has KPIs. That person is sitting in a very competitive work environment. And I'm not talking about Aspen specifically, I'm talking about in general. It's competitive out there. Especially with COVID, you hear of so many companies that are going through really tough times and everything, and that's always on people's minds. So they want to do absolutely everything in their power to meet their KPIs and to perform their best. So if a person is having a crisis because they can't do something right, and it's something small, just make sure someone spends the time and actually gets them through that, because it is important to that individual. And if it's important to them, it means it's important somewhere in the process as well. And in the beginning, when you go live and a person logs a P1 call because he's struggling to order Coca-Cola for the canteen, as an example, understand that yes, it might take a conversation and a negotiation to get that down from a P1. It's not really a P1 and doesn't stop the business, but for that person, it's a crisis. There might be commercial implications in terms of contracts, all sorts of stuff. So you need to really be aware, or at least in your team, people need to have that awareness of what does success mean on an individual level? Because again, if you can't get the little things right, it's the little big things that you're never going to get the big things right. You absolutely have to, and this is again where you sometimes need to go back, go and question your assumptions, go and make sure that you realign with the past, if I can call it that, before you can actually move on to the future. Oh, I hadn't moved my slide. Sorry, I had to only moved it on my Crip note. So there's that quote: if you can't do the little things right, you will never do the big things right. And those are just the notes relating to what I've been saying. And then, of course, rinse and repeat. So it is important to keep the momentum going. It's a very odd place once you go live with such a big implementation, because it's this crunch time, then you go live, and then the real hard work actually only starts. In our case, we went live, and then 3 weeks later had our first month end, and the next month was year end, so there was no time to stop. So you need to get the system stabilized, get the users sorted out, get everything closed off for you, and all of that stuff in a very short period of time. But what is important is that from there you retain that momentum, that you get the right people involved, that you expand the team, that you include other individuals if they were not part of the project, and they should be, that you establish networks and things like the user groups. I really do hope that I can encourage our users to participate enough in, because I think there's a huge support network in there. And it's certainly very helpful. And a lot of it is not on the technical side, and I think we've been saying this for years as well. It's on the business side. It's how do you address this business issue? And it's not just addressing the business issue with technology. It's really, how do you solve the problem? How do you solve the problem in a creative way? Maybe the problem isn't even there anymore, because there are other ways to do things which would eliminate or bypass the problem. Maybe you used to get your data from your reporting system, but now that you see all this cool reporting in your ERP, your users realize they can actually get the real-time data straight from there. So it alleviates time spent on queries with your BI team during the month, so they can do what they need to do, and there's only a consolidation at the end, or whatever the case may be. But there's definitely a lot to be said for keeping that momentum going, building those connections inside the business, providing opportunity for those users to build them outside of the business as well, and then just keep going and definitely avoid complacency. When you do an implementation of this size, we all know initially it's just getting the stuff in there in the best way that you can, but then you haven't even touched the what ifs. In order to build that maturity on the system so that you know how to refine and how to eliminate complexity and how to standardize things and how to set the foundation for future cool stuff that you might want to do. And also, if you've got an engaged user base, those are the guys who are going to come back with the real innovations. Those are the guys who are going to tell you, actually, you know what, I can solve this business problem in this way. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of this journey. I think it's going to be a very exciting one. I think we've got the right people to keep this momentum going. Now we just need to apply our minds and our time, and amongst everything else that keeps changing in business always, yes, hold the fort and keep moving. And that's it from my presentation perspective. I think we've made up a little bit of time, so we do have some time for questions.
Thanks so much, Louise, and thank you for that very comprehensive feedback. So I have a couple of questions because, of course, I saw change management and I knew this was happening. So I think the first question that I have for you is, what kind of activities did you do to keep people motivated during COVID, while trying to make this change and trying to deal with all these different types of trainings and things?
You know what? I think the timelines helped a lot with it. There was no time to stop and smell the roses. There really wasn't. Again, thankful to our users who, despite working remotely, still pulled their weight. I mean, we had people online at silly hours. It was really so. I think the motivation was everyone pulling up their sleeves and getting in the trenches together. It's as weird as it sounds. It almost sounds militaristic, but that really, it does build a team. In fact, we had some people who, when they did have time to breathe and they, weren't as much in crunch time, actually took some strain, because it's like you've got this momentum and it's almost like the dog who's finally caught the car. What do you now do with it? So motivation, I definitely think, like I said, just everyone jumping in, pulling up their sleeves, doing whatever needs to be done, whether it's part of your role or not, definitely motivated each other.
Wonderful. And what do you think is one of the key, because one of the other aspects that you mentioned was leadership. What's one of the key things that leadership contributes to keeping that momentum and motivation you were talking about?
I think honest and open communication. So if there's a point where your deadline can no longer move out for whatever reasons, that honest and open communication. Look, guys, this is where we are. This is where it's at. What's it going to take to make that? It's not hiding things, not sugarcoating things. So being open and honest about all communication, and then also just, we really had phenomenal leadership in terms of being forthcoming in saying, okay, we know you guys are taking strain. What else can we do? Who else can be involved? What do you need to escalate to us? What do we need to take to other piles? Can we apply this? Can we get more resources from here? So it was really a very collaborative, although high speed and high stress project, but it was a very collaborative, I think, experience.
Wonderful. And we've got a question here from Reg Barry for you. He asks, he says, Louise, awesome inputs. What's next on the journey?
Well, Reg, as you know, we are on our European platform, and those businesses are a bit ahead of time. So I think we'll take a look at some of the things that they've done and possibly bring them. But for now, for the immediate future, it's definitely first stabilization. It is tweaking here and there where we find things don't necessarily work the way we intended them to. So I think stabilizing it so that there's not a sense of comfort, but that we no longer feel like we are stabilizing. Once we get out of that mode, we can look at what the next things are. So I don't have a definitive answer for you.
Perfect, thank you. And then from Gerard Greiling, we've got, hi Louise, in your experience, what was the amount of retraining required for users to get used to Fiori?
In our case, none, because we didn't go from ECC to S4, and we didn't go from GUI to Fiori. It was a brand new SAP implementation. We went from a barn Infor environment to S4 HANA with Fiori. From a user experience perspective, I think our users, so some of them obviously did work in other companies where they did work on ECC and did work on GUI, and that feedback has been quite good. Our European businesses were on GUI, and they went live on Fiori during the same time that we implemented. Their feedback was that it was quite an easy adjustment. I think for myself, there are certain things that you're just used to doing on GUI, but once you've spent the time on Fiori, you can really figure it out. I mean, their feedback from people who were experienced in our other business units was that they didn't even require training because it was easy enough to adopt. I think the tricky thing is just if there are specific transactions that they used to where there's no Fiori tile for and things like that. So that initial navigation, I think, is a little bit of getting used to.
Perfect, thank you. So another question from me, and one I always get asked, so this is why I'm enjoying being able to ask you the question. I loved your slide about people with passion. And so many people say, but this is a very highly developed skill that is needed to be able to do this. So how do you balance that skill versus passion?
So the resources, the IT resources that we had on the project don't have a lot of SAP experience. They have a lot of ERP experience and other systems. Some of them have been exposed to SAP, but not on this level. We had our consulting partners who were phenomenal, and they obviously bring the technical skills. And I've always believed if you've got the passion and the people, the technical side of it is really the easier part. And I'm not making small of the technical skills that's required. Don't get me wrong. But it is easier to learn the technical stuff than to grow the passion. You don't grow the passion overnight. You also need people who are mature. So you need someone who can say, listen, I don't know, help. And if I look at the amount of growth that our guys did on a technical level, it is astounding. They would not have done that without the passion to make it happen.
Definitely, I hear you. So they're feeding each other. Let me see if we've got another question for you.
I think people are tired by now.
Sorry?
I think people are tired by now.
No. We've got a question from Marnie Stein. I just saw another one from Marnie Stein here. He says, how did you manage change management with assuming business users and project teams working at home?
So for me, that's an interesting one. The change management is really part of how you roll out and how you implement. The change management almost takes care of itself through just the process of implementation. I think the fact that we had strong business people on the project from the get-go helped a lot. The fact that your methodologies are now more agile-ish and you have got a bigger contingent of people included from the start helps. Definitely things like the e-learning did help because people could go back and go play and go and redo their lessons and their transactions and stuff a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I think what did help us, funny enough, is technology. And again, we had rolled out things like Teams before. So we were already used to working in that environment. We'd literally taken our in-person environment online. So even our e-learning wasn't just leaving people to their own devices. We we facilitated the learning, even though it was on LMS, we facilitated it via Microsoft Teams. So it's just like standing in a classroom. We limited the classrooms to 10 people or so. You've got people who can ask questions and things like that. I think, Marnie, what also helped us was that the biggest chunk or a big chunk of our workforce are not direct ERP users. Again, they're people who are impacted, but they're not direct users of the system. Most of the people who were direct users of the system were actually involved from quite an early stage, in UATs, in workshops, and this started way before the project. When I say way before the project, I mean before we even went on RFP. There was the better part of a year spent in workshops, understanding how each part of the business works, how their processes fit together. This is before we even went to market. So it's been a long journey. I think that process in itself has helped a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Louise, for all of that information. As I said, we heard so many times in the past 2 days how important change management is. So your information is incredibly, incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for your time. And I wish you well on whatever else you're going to be reporting back to Reg on that needs to get done.
Thanks, Innocent. Thanks, everyone.